Welcome back to How Did You Get In? We're really excited for our guest today, Lesley Kim, a proud member of Section I HBS Class of 2021, alongside Julia and me. Prior to business school, Lesley was working in Korea and has worked internationally post-graduation, which we'll go into more detail about later. But this will be an especially good episode for prospective international students. We're so excited to have you here on the pod today, Lesley, and appreciate you being here with us.
Welcome, Lesley. So why don't we get started? And I know, big question, but can you tell us a little bit about your background, maybe pre-MBA?
Yeah, of course. So I was born in Korea. I moved to Canada, went to middle school and high school in Toronto, and then I moved to Boston, went to Tufts University, majored in international relations, and then went back to Korea and worked for Samsung STS, which is like a software solutions arm of Samsung for about 6 years before coming back to Boston for my MBA.
Amazing. Well, I have to ask, so international relations and then going to get your MBA, that's a big jump. What in the span of your time between undergrad and the MBA, what did you learn? What got you interested?
Yeah, so as a software solutions consultant, I felt like I had gotten enough of project management, product management, and global business development or management experience and knowledge over the 6 years I was at Samsung, but I really didn't have any exposure to finance. And then after being 6 years in Samsung, I realized that really boils down to the numbers. It's about P&L of the company. So I really wanted to get that more structured, systematic learning of the finance. And what better way is there than to join MBA? So that's why I decided to apply and then into HBS.
Did you see a lot of people around you at Samsung going the MBA route, or was it kind of abnormal?
So Samsung actually has this structured program where they select, I think, about 6 employees throughout the entire Samsung group, so like 200,000 employees, I guess for juniors for like 20,000. And then they send them off to MBA, and then they sponsor them, and they come back and join Samsung again. But around me at that time, I didn't really have anyone who were applying to MBA. So I was actually the first one within our class to apply.
That's amazing. I mean, I feel like I think for Alex and I both, we had been in cohorts where lots of people were talking about it, so it was top of mind. It sounds like you realized that, like, okay, there's this gap in what I've got exposure to. I know I want to fill the gap from a finance perspective. When did the idea of an MBA first come into your mind? Like, did you hear about it from someone? How did it come to your head? And then how did you start to think about what schools you wanted to apply to?
Yeah, I feel like I've always had the idea of going to MBA on the back of my mind, but I didn't. So I actually started studying or preparing for the GRE back in, so like 2 years after I joined Samsung, and I didn't do well. So I kind of gave up. And then 2 years kind of went by. And that's when I really realized that I really need to do something if I want to advance my career or go up that corporate ladder. And MBA, I needed that network. I needed that learning. I needed that just broad exposure to different people from different industries. And that's when I finally sat down and started studying for the GRE again.
Did you feel like it was a limitation at Samsung specifically to go up that career ladder, or you were more wanting other doors to open beyond Samsung?
Yes, I really wanted to actually work in the States because my job at Samsung was mostly dealing with our global business partners. So I wanted to get a chance to actually move to here and then work in the States. And I was in blockchain for the last year at Samsung. So I wanted to pivot towards more fintech industry.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, and I want to go back to what you shared about like taking the GMAT once, or GRE, sorry, and then pausing. Alex and I can both certainly relate. We both, I think, took it 3 times a piece. So when did you, after sort of pencils down the first time, how did you kind of muster up? What did you do differently the second time or third time? No judgment here, because it took 3 times for both of us. What got you ready for the GRE when you took your final attempt?
Right. I feel like, honestly, I was a little more desperate.
Nothing like desperation.
I was more desperate, and I decided that, I learned that I didn't have that much time, because I feel like 5-6 years of work experience is more than enough to get into MBA. And anything after that, I feel like I would have really forced myself to sit down and try something new. So it was that desperation. And something that I did differently was I took a more structured study plan, drafted so I gave myself 6 months before. I didn't give myself that time frame. And I kind of divided each month into what kind of like quant and verbal that I wanted to focus on and really nail down with the practice questions. Before it was just me going over the GRE prep book and just kind of understanding how the test is all, formed in a way. So it was just me learning about the basics of the GRE. But the second time, I really drilled down on the practice exams and questions.
Clearly, it worked out well. And were you doing that before you started on your other application materials, or did you have to parallel path it?
No, I just wanted to get that out of the way. So I started January of 2018, and then I took my GRE May 2018. And then the application essays start, I think the school start posting them around like June, July time. So I made sure that I aligned that like time frame to be ready for the essays.
I love that. You treated it as like a marathon, not a sprint, trying to do every last piece at once. And it also sounds like the second time, I think many of us can relate, where it's you approached the GRE, you had a plan, you gave yourself a set amount of time, you had strategy. I'm curious, did you do the same thing with your essays? How did you think about structuring your approach? You had from June until round one, or was it more disorganized? We've seen both ways work.
It was organized and disorganized in a way. So I thought it was organized in my mind until I actually started it. Then I was like, okay, there's so many things I want to talk about. I don't actually know what I want to do. Like, I don't have a clear vision of my short-term and long-term goals. So in that way, it was very disorganized, and I needed to really go through multiple rounds of writing essays to come down to eventually what I really wanted to pursue or convey to the schools. So it was more disorganized in a way that I myself wasn't ready. I didn't do enough of self-reflection to really see how that really fits into my overall journey, my career journey and personal journey. But I did in my mind have a essay writer plan. So I did have a structured plan in terms of timeline, but in terms of what I really wanted to say, I was very disorganized.
So I definitely want to go more into like how you ended up crafting your narrative, but I know that you had a bad experience when talking to an admissions consultant. Can you walk us through what happened?
Yes. So honestly, I had no resources around me. I was the first one to apply within, again, my Samsung cohort. So I felt like I needed some kind of structured help to really guide me through the entire process. I didn't know what I needed to talk about. I didn't know what kind of strengths that I wanted to highlight on my application, what kind of weaknesses that I wanted to really make up for by going to MBA. And I thought someone who's been through that and someone who's there to really help me provide me with that information. So I went to an MBA consultant. She told me, so she went through my application background and she told me, well, the best school with your profile that you can get into is Virginia Darden. And at that time, my school that I wanted to, like my dream school was CBS. And she kind of made it sound like I didn't have a chance of getting into CBS. So that's when I realized that I needed to kind of back off and do things on my own. And I got into HBS.
You ended up doing it yourself. And so how did you kind of were saying you weren't organized in the way that you wanted to be. How did you end up like nailing down that narrative, and what were the key points in your story during your application?
Yeah. So I did a lot of self-reflection on my own, but I also reached out to my friends from Tufts, from Samsung, to see what kind of strengths that they saw in me. So it's always nice to have that fresh perspective. You think that you're good at one thing, but then when other people see you, there might be 40 other different things that you are good at and you can contribute to the community. So I had like deep conversations with my friends, my colleagues, and then I think I had like 20 different versions of what is your long-term, short-term goals? What are you trying to achieve by going to MBA? Why MBA now? You know, those questions all the schools ask. And I made the exact same people kind of read over all those versions. And then help me pick out which ones are most authentic to me. And that's how I came down to like the 3 things that I talked about throughout all my essays.
I feel like there's a couple of things that you did in there that I just want to highlight. One, I think while it is very much like a journey of self-introspection and thinking about what you want, what your strengths are, like looking to a close network of friends and having a little bit of variety both from college and the workplace, it makes a ton of sense to sort of get that background feedback and hear how other people see you. I think that's really smart. And then the second thing that I think stands out is like you should expect when you're doing these essays, it's going to take some versions. It is not a one and done for 99% of people. So I think we all have that V20, V30 saved. I am curious, like as your friends went through and the people, was there a pretty strong consensus as they reviewed, like this is the one, or was it all over the place? Because I think sometimes you have to be careful about the balance, the amount of feedback that you get.
Yes. I think I got lucky in a way that it came down to 3 versions, like everyone just selected the exact 3, same 3 versions. So it was easy for me in that way. But then on, you really have to build on your case, right? You just have like a framework, and then you have to add on these needs and like what you really want to talk about on your essay. So I would say that was like 10% of the work. And then the 90% began.
Yeah, I feel like that framework is important. I call it like a common thread that's like weaving throughout to try to make that compelling narrative that makes sense and, people can understand where you're coming from. If you were to take a guess, what do you think helped you stand out from the rest?
I think being in blockchain when it was at its hottest as a female in Korea, I think that's something that really made my application stand out. And there was a question, like blockchain experience questions were asked during all of my interviews. So that's know that they were very interested. And also my role as the chief of staff to the CEO when I was at Samsung, that was something that I feel like all the schools thought was very interesting. And I had a lot of stories when I was working as a chief of staff. So that's something that I was one of the main prompts in my application and my essays.
If you have to look back on your application, do you have any places where you're like, ooh, that was kind of a weak spot. Like if I could go back and do this again, I would rewrite that or I would do that differently, or you're glad they overlooked?
It's a good question. It's been a while. It's been like 5 years since I wrote my essays, but something I think I would be more specific in like how I can contribute to the community, like the MBA school. I feel like I was providing very generic answers by just going through their websites and then kind of trying to match my strengths with like what the school, what like unique experiences that they offer. Just very generic, right? I feel like it should connecting the dots. But if I had talked to more students, then I feel like I would have been able to provide more personalized stories around how I can contribute to these communities and what I hope to gain from the schools.
But even if you felt like you were giving generic answers, I think even just to your point, like your chief of staff role to the COO and the blockchain experience, I think the implied value is your ability to talk and draw upon those experiences in the classroom setting. So I feel like they could probably read between the lines, be like, oh yeah, she's going to be a good class contributor, which Julia and I can attest to she was. I'm curious, when you originally were saying CBS was your dream school, what was your final list of schools and how did you arrive at that list?
So I applied to 5 schools in total. I applied to HBS, MIT Sloan, Wharton, CBS, and Yale SOM. Like very different, right? I knew location was a big thing for me, and I knew that I wanted to come back to New England, preferably within Boston. So HBS and MIT were my top choices. And I feel like these schools, their values and their visions are very different. For example, Yale SOM, I feel like they focus more on more nonprofit, while Wharton is like very finance, right? Very like private equity, investment banking, anything finance. And HBS, for me, be a leader to make a difference in the world, that really resonated with me. So looking at the locations, looking at the visions and the overall message of the school, and also as an international student, you have to really think about like the loans that I have access to, right? Because I didn't have social security number, so I couldn't really get any federal loans or any loans that are available to permanent residents or the citizens of the U.S. and like the housing options, the visa process, and what kind of support that I'll be getting from like the Career Center in terms of securing a job on my visa, like my H visa after graduation. Those are the things that I also considered as an international student that normally like the U.S. students wouldn't consider. So yeah, a lot of different factors went into me coming down to the list of those 5 schools that I applied to and eventually selecting HBS.
That makes sense. I'm curious on the international student perspective. Do you think that there was anything different that you had to do in your application? Do you think your odds were different coming from an international background? Anything you had to sort of show different than maybe someone coming from stateside?
Yes. I mean, we always talk about like my friends who are males who are in finance or Asians. They talk about how their chances of getting into an MBA is lower because they're Asian, male, and finance, and there's gazillion of them, right? So as me coming with very diverse perspective and experiences, global experiences, and also as an Asian female in tech I wasn't an engineer, right? I had an international relations major. So I feel like having that very diverse background, like front end, back end, front office, back office, non-engineering to engineering, working with the engineers and just living in like Panama for 6 months, living in States, Canada, Korea. I feel like that really added on to build a more diverse picture of who I am.
I think if you have a different background than the average, I think some people are concerned if they're not from consulting or finance and yes, that does make up a large body, but I think if you spin it really well, you can really lean into not having call it a more traditional background or, factoring in a bunch of the factors. And I think that's a really good thing to lean into it for sure. I did want to ask, can you just clarify how the HBS financial piece is different than other schools? And I think we don't talk enough about the finances of affording an MBA program. And I think there's a lot of people from the outside just assuming that everyone is just going off family money. And that's very, very, very much the minority who are 100% getting it paid for from family.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, going to MBA, it's a big investment, right? You are like opportunity cost of you not working anymore and coming back to school. And then you have your tuition and then you have like your living expenses and also MBAs where you like travel with your classmates and that is part of an experience. So you do spend a lot. So HBS was different that Harvard is a very big institution. So Harvard actually has a student loan program that's run and funded by the Harvard office, and the interest rates obviously are lower than like the private loans that you can get. So that was a plus, obviously, for me that I didn't really need to burden myself with crazy expensive interest rates without like a U.S. cosigner. It just made the process a little easier for me in terms of the finances. And also HBS is very generous that they give financial aids to need-based. It's not merit-based, it's need-based. So it's, and at that time, the US dollar was so much stronger compared to Korean won. So what I was earning in Korean won really didn't translate that much into US dollars. So like there's different macroeconomic factors that obviously HBS considers when they're selecting the need-based financial aids, but they're very generous. They make sure that the students who got in have the opportunity to really take full advantage of the MBA education. So I feel like HBS and also Harvard have amazing financial aids and loan programs.
I think all three of us have benefited from her, like obviously sort of the access to the loans, but some need-based financial aid, and like all came from decent salaries certainly, but providing some kind of coverage to just make the decision a little easier. So yeah, it's good to highlight that. And maybe we'll shift, that sort of speaks to a lot of the why for HBS, but maybe you can tell us or give us like one or two highlights of your actual business school experience. We got a front row seat to it. We got to watch the whole thing. So we have our own highlights, but when you look back on your 2 years at HBS, what stands out to you?
So HBS is I think it's a very unique school. It's very stressful, but you do have the resource around you to kind of not thrive within this competitive environment. The case study method, it's very scary, but I think it's very effective. So it's not like like a normal classroom where you have a textbook and you learn about, I don't know, WAC, for example, right? How to build a WAC. But instead, they kind of just slide that WAC calculation into this case study where you really have to approach it from different perspectives, and you need to reach out to your classmates who've been in finance before to really come up with the answers before the class, in case you get called or in case a professor asks you to build on someone else's cases. So that's what makes HBS so unique. That's something that I remember so vividly. It's being put on the spot, but also I think it's very effective that they make you practice coming up with like a conclusion based on your learnings or your data that you feel confident enough to present to your classmates and kind of give them to build on your ideas and opinions and your answers. So that's something that's very different for HBS. And all the support that you get from schools, your classmates. It's very unique that you have your section mates that you call yourself, like that's your home, right? You build very deep relationships with your section mates, but then you also have access to this 1,000 other classmates from different perspectives, different backgrounds, and very diverse that you can tap into always, anytime, even after you graduate, right? So that's something that makes HBS very unique. It's not a small school, but it's big, but you also have that 90 cohorts of people that you have.
You make an interesting point with finance cases specifically. You basically have to rely on your finance classmates to help you through it. But in a weird way, that I think both the combination of like you're applying it for a very specific case and like you remember the business, but then even having to like call it hunting for the right answer and having to like work with other people, it's kind of like a lesson of figuring it out on the job, which ultimately we all have to end up doing at a certain point. So it's a different type of prep and like more applicable prep to what your realistic job is afterwards versus just doing problem sets that maybe it builds the muscle better, but I think it like is teaching you different skills. So I think that's a great thing. I think you touched on a lot of things that resonate with me in terms of the HBS experience. I'm curious if there's any myths or misconceptions that you'd want to debunk about HBS.
I think like FOMO resonate from HBS.
Or of course, HBS wants to claim that FOMO originated there.
I feel like at a very competitive environment like HBS, you feel like you really have to be involved with everything, be at every event, be friends with everyone. And it's really overwhelming. I think everyone does start off thinking that they're going to be able to be part of everything. And then they do get that FOMO when they're not feeling well, so they can't go to an event. Really, at the end of the day, it really doesn't impact your whole MBA experience. Sometimes it's just nice to take a step back and take care of yourself and kind of distance yourself from that competitive environment. You don't have to go to every single event, and you don't have to get a 1 in every single class to make the most out of your MBA experience, especially at HBS. You can just and go on your own pace, but at the same time, you really have to open up yourself to different perspectives, very diverse opinions and ideas to really find out what matters to you and also how this whole experience, again, relates back to your entire long-term, short-term career goals.
Well, you segued us beautifully when you think about your short and long-term career goals after HBS, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in the last 3 or so years.
I thought I was very international before I came to HBS, but after graduation, I've become even more international. I joined American Tower's leadership development program, where it's like a rotational program for 2 years. We rotate through 4 different teams every 6 months, and it's required that we do international assignments. So because of COVID, I wasn't able to actually move to Miami, but I've worked with global supply chain management team in Miami. Then I've worked with corporate finance team in Boston. Then I was in Singapore for about a year, working as a chief of staff to the president of APAC. And then I was in Germany for 7 months, doing procurement and service delivery. Now I'm back in Boston for my full-time job with corporate finance with American Tower. So I've been going everywhere, working with different teams, building my network within the company to really understand the ins and outs of the business.
I think you're a great example of someone who used the MBA to pivot. I mean, even when you started talking about like at Samsung, you were getting a lot of exposure, but not to finance. And now you find yourself in corporate finance and despite struggling through some of the finance cases. So it can be done. I'm curious how, if the HBS MBA like helps you on a day-to-day basis or, how are you kind of applying maybe what you learned?
I mentioned WAC because that's what I'm in charge of now. Within the company, I manage our company's WAC, our regional WACs, our company, our country level WACs. So like hard skills, not knowing anything about numbers, not knowing anything about income statement, balance sheets, like revenue, whatever, like cash flow statements, to now being in charge of financial planning, forecasting, reporting, and coming up with like earnings materials and managing company WACs. I feel like HBS really did prep me for that like finance hard skills and like soft skills, going back to like the case study and what Alex had mentioned before. It's one thing to do all these work, but it's another to really be able to present your work to your senior management, to your colleagues, and be effective in your communications. So that's also something that I feel like really helped me through my education at HBS.
Definitely. And I mean, I can imagine, you described that cold call moment and now it's like you're in a meeting and the reality is like in those kinds of meetings, high stakes meetings, you're kind of getting the equivalent of a cold call question from your boss every day. Of like, well, what is this from? What does that look like? And I think part of the repetition of those cold calls and the moments of pressure in the classroom, it's like training for your exposure in the corporate office later, right? And do you use the HBS community? How do you stay in touch with the HBS community, whether it's alumni or friends, or how does that factor into your sort of life at work and outside of it?
Other than getting brunch with me in Boston.
Yes. my ladies here. I think one cool thing that we always talk about is how now we're at that stage we're all getting married or like getting children. So we have these reunions every year where we get to go to different countries. Like we're in India, we're in Brazil. At my wedding next year, I'm hosting everyone in Korea. So it's really cool that we have this very international group of ladies where we get to go visit their countries and like actually experience their cultures by going to these weddings or important events of their lives. So that's how I feel like even though we're in different places, we have these regular reunions that we get to see each other again in person, which is really nice. And at work, I feel like HBS, after graduating from it, you're at this really weird position. At least this is how I felt like it. You're kind of, like, people are kind of always testing you, like, you went to HBS, let's see how good you are. Or you went to HBS, I'm sure you have other more valuable things to add. So I feel like personally, myself, I've been kind of struggling to not really think about like what my education or like this pedigree might mean to other people, but just really focus on like my work and what I can do. But that's something that I've talked to other people after graduating from school, that people have also been kind of dealing with those kind of, I guess, perceptions that I'm sure not that many people actually think about that way. But like in my mind, I feel like I'm getting challenged, or like people are watching to see how good I do because I went to HBS. With relationships, I get a lot of calls from people who are graduating from HBS about like job opportunities. And whenever I need someone, some inputs from some people in ethics finance, like private equity, or people who've done it for multiple years, I go to them for their advice or just to pick their brain on what they're thinking. So it's nice to have that diverse community of people support that I can always reach out to in like tech and finance and all these different industries. So yeah, it's been very helpful.
It sounds like you're both paying it forward in terms of talking to those fresh grads and giving them advice, and then also reaping some rewards as well, which is the beauty of going to a school like HBS. So I'm thinking as we're starting to wrap it up, what advice you would give to people either just starting the application process, they're thinking about going to, HBS specifically, or they're just trying to figure out if the MBA is right for them. Anywhere along that journey, what advice would you give to prospective applicants?
So if you do have MBA in your mind, I think it's best if you just take the GMAT or the GRE, just get it out of your way. You have it valid for 5 years, so just get that out of the way, and then you can always come back and think if it's actually right for you in terms of your career path. But it's always nice to just one less thing to worry about, right? So when you're actually ready, you can just dive right into the actual application process. So if you're thinking about it, get that out of your way. And you have to do a lot of self-reflection to see how that really, again, fits into your overall career, right? Because coming to MBA, it's not only going to change your career projections, but also your personal life too. You have to relocate sometimes to go to a school. So you have to think about if this is the right time, why you really want to come to MBA and what you hope to gain. Those are the things that I feel like you really have to do some self-reflections and serious thinking to see if you're willing to invest all that time, that money, that effort to step away from work for 2 years and then having to go back. It is a big change. So again, out if you're ready for it, if you think it's necessary, and if this is the right time for you.
Any additional specific advice for international students who are thinking about it?
Yes. So if you did not go to school in the States, get the TOEFL out of the way along with your GRE and GMAT because the schools do require that. And make sure that there's so many different things that you have to worry about as an international students. Like you have to think about your visa situation. You have to make sure even little things like getting your transcript like translated and notarized by an official company. That's also another thing. So those little things that is so much easier if you just get them out of the way before you start your application process. So you need to do, I guess, twice more research than the U.S. citizen or like U.S. Applicants, but those are the details that will matter in your application.
I'm hearing give yourself a little extra time because there just inherently are unfortunately more steps. Well, Lesley, you have given so much great advice, and it's fun as your friends and colleagues to hear about your journey. And you really went to business school to learn more about finance, get into it, and then it's cool to see you doing that. You were very focused and thoughtful in what you wanted to do, and you achieved what you were looking for. So it's a great example of how you can use an MBA to pivot if you're specific and thoughtful. And we're just incredibly appreciative of the time and getting to chat with you. Wow, I always feel so grateful to get to have conversations like that with our classmates. I think we want to do a quick recap. I wanted to share first from my reflections on why I think Lesley was such a stellar candidate to begin with and why a school like HBS wanted to take her. So a couple of the things that I heard from the interview with Lesley. One, I think she had good timing, right? She was an expert in blockchain, and that is a place that HBS would want that kind of voice in the classroom to be able to speak to blockchain in depth and have other students learn about it. I also think her experience as a chief of staff before business school, hugely valuable to be able to share lessons from the office of the CEO. And then finally, she clearly had a number of global experiences. And I think business schools really, really look fondly upon that. So that's what stood out to me. What did you think, Alex?
Yeah, I think it was interesting. I didn't realize that so few Samsung employees go to business school, but I do think at the same time, business schools love a big brand name like a Samsung. Like they want to, that's how they build their global network. And so I think also just the brand recognition is huge. And not only the blockchain experience, but then the fact that she's a female in blockchain. And the reality is a lot more of the international Korean applicants are probably going to be males in finance. And I was also really impressed going into how she approached the application process. She did what neither of us did, but we say you should do is separating taking the GRE versus the rest of the application process. So she did it plenty time in advance, was able to get a good score, get that out of the way before the essay questions were even released. So that's huge to not have to balance your time between studying and the essay prompts. Something that she said that I think is common with a lot of great applicants is she went through a self-reflection process trying to make sure she was articulate on why business school, why Harvard specifically, and other schools. And she talked to close family and friends and made sure that her narrative sounded authentic to her. And I think that's huge, because if it doesn't feel authentic, it's not going to read authentic. And I think also she did have a very good reason why an MBA. She had gotten a lot of exposure to basically everything but finance, but was seeing like, hey, the P&L ultimately runs the business and determines if the company stays alive or not. And so identifying, hey, I really need this exposure to finance and I want to be able to pivot into that. I think it's a really compelling case, because you do want to make it clear like how an MBA can help you and why you need it. So I think lots of great things she did in the application process.
I mean, that is absolutely accurate. I always have a soft spot for anyone who has to take the GMAT or GRE multiple times and who's willing to put in the work. But I think what you just said about finance kind of brings me to one of the main takeaways of what did she get out of the MBA experience. And she set out to get those finance skills. She talked and she triggered a little PTSD with me talking about calculating the WACC live in a case, but she's now using that in her day-to-day job. And so her ability to use what she learned, get those financial skills, get the language of finance down, and then actually be able to pivot into that career. To me, that is a perfect use case of how an MBA can be absolutely worth it and how she maximized her experience. What do you think she got out of the MBA, or what was her the biggest takeaway you heard for her?
I think, well, yeah, there's a lot that she actually got in terms of the network, but something that I didn't realize financial aid was important to me, but it was also interesting to hear the international perspective of like why Harvard is so compelling from a financial aid perspective. So even just being able to go to business school in a more affordable way and get to go to one of the best, if not the best business schools doing so is pretty cool. So I didn't think about that from the international perspective and how it can be more difficult to get good loans if you're coming from outside. And then also she went into a leadership development program. Those are great programs. They get you exposure to different types of teams, roles, even countries in her experience. And those are types of programs that really only recruit out of undergrad or out of MBA. And so, she really took advantage of the MBA to get herself into that spot. And yeah, now she's a corporate finance girl, which is pretty impressive.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the episode and hope you enjoyed our takeaways. It was a pleasure to get to hear from Lesley.